And here we go. Welcome again, Dan Willis, to our group meeting. And this is our second Zoom with you. And we are so thrilled to have you once again to talk about the UFO disclosure that you were involved with.
Ellen, it's my honor to join all of you. It's good to explore and ask questions and about our history that has been hidden away from most of it. Most of your group here is pretty savvy, you know, listening to Simon Parks and no doubt keeping check on other current events happening on the planet. In 2001, when I was, you know, joining these other 20 witnesses, I didn't even know what Operation Mockingbird was. I thought, you know, 22 cameras in the back row, all the mainstream media. I thought, how could the explosive testimonies that we were saying, you know, not be a world disclosure, you know, world changing event, you know, talking about that we've already had faster than light craft built back in the 50s, 57 different species, nukes being shut down, bases on the other side of the moon, astronauts sworn to secrecy, what happened when they went to the moon, NASA airbrushing the UFOs out, presidents, CIA directors with legal constitutional authority are being denied access. That's what brought about the meeting. That we have these scientists within these black projects that were willing to come forth with an open congressional hearing. That's what we were seeking. The Bush administration denied that congressional hearing. The mainstream media that covered this event, you know, CNN, CBS, you know, all of them, they did what's called, the intelligence communities call a limited hangout, made it sound like he wanted to have a congressional hearing on simply just the reality of UFOs. You know, CNN comes on with, oh, is there life on other planets? Some people think they have proof there is. Elaine Tiana explains, you know, and they go on with, you know, oh, they have CIA memos. They want to have a congressional hearing, despite the criticism from skeptics. But they didn't touch one of the, any of these explosive testimonies. So they effectively, you know, sanitized it. What brought this meeting about 20 years ago, hard to believe, you know, I thought the whole world would be changed. We'd have anti-gravity by now. We'd have, you know, all kinds of amazing technologies released. But, you know, we still have the deep state to deal with here. What happened was a long series of events going all the way back to World War II, where the Nazis infiltrated in. They created a matrix of perception. They had this plan before the end of the war because they knew they could operate from the underground. They effectively escaped, you know, to Antarctica, and you know, there was like 100 U-boats missing, 250,000 Germans. The top scientists didn't come over in Project Paperclip. 1950, Operation Mockingbird by Alan Dulles, who was very instrumental in the whole Nazi infiltration. They had 400 journalists that control the perceptions on the mainstream media. The Rockefeller Foundation, working closely with the Nazis, rewrote the history of World War II in 1946 to hide the Nazi infiltration escape. They infiltrated Hollywood. They infiltrated the pharmaceutical corporations. As you know, they were running NASA. So they effectively infiltrated in and did create a matrix of perception. What probably a lot of you were aware that Nazi Germany did achieve anti-gravity back in 1934, a whole 20 years before the United States developed it by October of 1954. By that time, it was during President Eisenhower's administration where the Nazi Fourth Reich infiltrated into an industrial military complex, which Eisenhower attempted to warn the public about. what happened was because of the technological advancement of Nazi Germany, where they were able to completely defeat Admiral Byrd, who was sent down by James Forrestal to attack the Nazi base in Antarctica, where they came out with their anti-gravity craft with directed energy weapons and completely defeated his whole armada. He had to swear everybody to secrecy, and then in 1952 they were flying over the Capitol building. So essentially they intimidated the Truman and Eisenhower administrations, and by February 1955 at Holloman Air Force Base, one of the Nazi saucers came down from Antarctica, and Eisenhower met with the Germans, and I'm not sure if he met with the extraterrestrial race that they was in alliance with, but a somewhat of a surrender and agreement was written. And ever since that time, every single president, CIA director, heads of intelligence, doesn't matter what level you're at, has been denied access. President Eisenhower tried to gain access after they moved all their operations from Wright-Patterson over to Area 51, the reverse engineering operations. He was denied access. He threatened to go in with the First Army out of Colorado, and he's going to rip this thing apart, he said. You know, he's like, here, a 5-star general. But they only allowed 2 CIA agents to give him a report. Kennedy, 10 days after he tried to get this UFO files released from the CIA, an assassination directive was carried out by Allen Dulles. President Carter, who had a UFO experience, he had a report, and he made it his campaign promise to reveal it to the public. The CIA director, George H.W. Bush, denied him access. As one of the witnesses, Daniel Sheehan, is the attorney, our legal counsel, had firsthand experience, and that was his testimony. Then it went on to President Clinton, who, the little lady who sponsored the 2001 event, the White House correspondent, Sarah McClendon, asked him, why aren't you doing anything with a disclosure? And he said, Sarah, there's a secret government within the government, and I don't control it. And he has a CIA director, James Woolsey. The CIA director tried to look into it, and the CIA director is being denied access into his military and intelligence channels. So he brings a civilian, Dr. Stephen Greer, into a 3-hour meeting. He was the head for the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. He brought a huge stack of documents substantiating the reality of it. The words out of the CIA director's mouth is, you know, I know the subject's real. I'm trying to figure out why the hell I can't gain access to it. And so, being aware of the gravity of the situation, he met with some military advisors, and they decided to start collecting witnesses in the military, intelligence, corporate areas, not just a dozen or 2 dozen or 3 dozen, but hundreds of witnesses. In 1993, I since my testimony is rather minor compared to some of the other testimonies, basically the U.S. Navy is having reports of spacecraft coming out of the oceans. 1969, I had a top secret clearance working in naval communications at the Naval Communications Station in San Francisco. I was a high-speed coder operator, and one of the ships off the coast of Alaska, the crew visually witnessed coming off a port bow of the ship, a 70-foot diameter, brightly glowing reddish orange elliptical saucer that merged out of the ocean in front of them and then shot straight up into space. The radar operator was able to catch the blitz at estimated going over 7,000 miles per hour. This was 1969. This was a secret classified priority message going to the Chief of Naval Operations. This message, I took thousands of messages, you can imagine, in the years I worked there. It always burned an image in the back of my head as I was receiving and interpreting the code, and typing it on the typewriter. It was primitive stuff back then. I couldn't believe what I was writing. I was like, my God, it's like a science fiction story. And so it seeded in my mind. And so I've been kind of looking to find more indicators of this reality. And it's like, why, when this is real, we have, flying saucers coming out of our oceans. Why isn't this more public knowledge? And so in 1993, I met with a group of a dozen and a half researchers outside of Area 51. The first time that Robert Lazar, who was reverse engineering one of these craft over at the S4 facility at Area 51, went public, but no recording whatsoever was allowed. I happened to be sitting in the front row. I had my camcorder going, recorded the full 2 hours of him being hit nonstop with pretty savvy group with questions, one after another. All these decades later, every single one of his responses has been 100% consistent. His testimony has never varied. But what happened was, because of this activity outside of Area 51, the base went into complete lockdown, and they sent out a National Security Advisory, an NRO, National Reconnaissance Office, security advisory to all base personnel to avoid contact with this group that's having this meeting out there. And on this list, with these documents, what they have is they have like a to and from, and they have a classification, and they have a distribution list of everybody that it's going to, everybody who it's routed to. And on it was unacknowledged special access programs such as Cosmic Ops, Magi Ops. These operations were reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology. This document was somehow gotten into the hands of Dr. Stephen Greer, who went to the Pentagon along with, this was 1997, along with Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, and Commander Will Miller, to meet with the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson. Him in his constitutional authority should have had access, if anybody. He looked into it, and they denied him access, and he was furious. He told Dr. Greer that, realizing that, here, somebody who's the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff is being denied access. He said, if you can get your people willing to testify under oath, you have my permission to go to the mainstream media with this. This group is illegal, quote unquote. And so it was May of 9th of 2001 that this event happened. I was actually a substitute for another witness that got pulled, which was, I found out later, was David Adair, who has an incredible testimony of actually interacting with one of the extraterrestrial anti-gravity power plants from a craft that he took him over to. He was a brilliant genius. But they needed somebody to fill in, so I volunteered. After each one of us stated, after giving our testimony, that we're willing to testify under oath, before a congressional hearing in front of all 22 cameras, which is penalty of perjury and, someone was breaking national security oaths. But because, according to our legal counsel, because the very nature of these operations are illegal, they cannot cite the rule of law against us. So after the press conference, we went up on Capitol Hill, met with about 24 senators, Congress people. We had a 500-page briefing document and a 4-hour-long executive briefing video, which, before anybody saw that, I actually set up the computer system for the president of Lockheed, and I sat down with the president of Lockheed for 4 hours hoping with the CIA connections he might be able to contribute, but no luck on that. So basically, it was like a hot potato. Everybody was out of the loop. Congressional hearing was denied by the Bush administration. So Dr. Greer did a grassroots kind of every major city across the United States he toured. I joined him in Boulder, Colorado, San Diego, LA, San Francisco, Sacramento, Portland, Ashland, up and down the whole West Coast. We rented these huge halls, and we had the executive briefing video going. The condensed one, not the 4-hour one. Nobody has, they can sit down. So we got it down to 1 hour. We had standing ovations. The television crews would come in. And San Diego, it had dancing alien dolls with smoke. They made fun of it every single time. In San Francisco, they said, oh, the Disclosure Project's looking to aliens to solve the world's energy problems. In Portland, I remember them talking, and they were saying, oh, they have 0-point energy and other solutions, and they all kind of look at each other. And they all kind of laugh, and they say, oh, come on, aliens and free energy. Let's get on to the big story. This week, the Bozos meet the Broncos in the playoffs, and they all laugh, So it's all this giggle factor, that they use throughout. And this was 2001, which was a different atmosphere than we have today because of the media did a blitz in 2017 because of the Nimitz 2004 incident with the Tic Tac, which incidentally, in 2019, Mike Tuber, who was an Air Force intelligence specialist, he came out publicly and said that the Tic Tac could do over 24,000 miles per hour and 500 miles per hour under the ocean, was made in California at the Palmdale Lockheed facility. And in this year, in April, he came out with a video and saying, I made the whole story up. There's no truth to it. And because that testimony basically says that we have the technology that can perform like that. And 1 week after he came out and said that, my fellow witness friend, Mark McCandish, who testified that they had these alien reproduction vehicles that were built back in the 1950s that can go faster than the speed of light. It was at an exhibit in 1988, Norton Air Force Base. He was going to testify at the Senate UFO UAP hearing just this last June 25th, I think. But he never made it to that hearing. He was met with a shotgun blast to his head and ruled as a suicide. But what's common between Mike Tuber's testimony that we have by the US Air Force Secret Space Program, these drones that the Navy was doing some testing with its radar, but people had no idea, it's just certain levels knew about it. And Mark McCandish's testimony is that we have these technologies that have been developed going way back to the 1950s. So it's almost as though Mike Tuber got met by somebody and said, you better reverse your testimony or else. And then they met with Mark 1 week later and they decided not to. It seems as though that way. It's just, I knew Mark and he was not one to commit suicide. It just coincidence, I guess, that he was going to give his testimony that we have these technologies that have been developed, going all the way back to the 1950s. We don't need nuclear power. We don't need coal. We don't need oil. These are all obsolete, dangerous technologies that have been obsolete for many decades. So after giving testimony. CBS wanted to do a private one-on-one interview with me. And I saw what CNN did with it. And so I said, look, you can come down from LA, you can interview me, but I have to be able to say a little short sentence that we have these scientists which can prove before an open congressional hearing that we have 0-point energy, which is the complete solution to the energy and environmental crisis with non-polluting energy. They promised completely. They interviewed me for 45 minutes. Afterward, the producer said, I'm sorry, I never had this happen before. The higher executives made me cut that part out. And the only thing I got to say in the CBS interview is we've reached a critical point where the truth needs to be revealed to the people, but the truth never got out. And so it was, I was like bewildered. What happened? How did this event get completely sanitized and swept under the rug? And some company out of Hollywood wanted me to write an article on the control of media in regards to the extraterrestrial issue. And I had no idea about all this. I didn't even know what Operation Mockingbird was, as I said. And so I started researching, and I decided I knew all these different witness testimonies, and I was familiar with many authenticated classified documents that surface that collaborate with many, many witnesses. And so in order to try to get a picture of what's going on that's hidden, I decided to put a chronology together. I put it up online, just sharing it's not a professional site, it's just my online notes at the webmatrix.net. And it goes from the year 1900 to present day. And I just started plugging in all these witness testimonies and documents and events that happened over the years to see if I could see a pattern that was happening. And after a while, after you start plugging in more information, you start researching, you start to see what's been hidden from us all this time. And basically, my conclusion so far is that we won the battle with the Nazis, but the Nazis basically won, and they infiltrated in. They have been controlling our perceptions. And when you say the Nazis, there's kind of like people use the term the deep state, which kind of includes everybody that's of the elitist mindset that want to reduce the population to a manageable slave force and to have this global control. And it seems the Chinese Communist Party fits in well with that, and globalist bankers, and the group. And so they have effectively controlling our media ever since, and I just learned this recently. You're always learning new things. I was very familiar with Alan Dulles and Operation Mockingbird, and in 1954, the Bilderbergs meetings were set up by the Nazi SS, and they, along with the Council of Foreign Relations, Trilateral, control the major corporations, of which in 1983 there was 50. And in 1983, they started these meetings, these secret meetings with the CIA, which brought in a lot of Nazis at the end of the war, along with all of big media, big tech. The last one was in July this year, along with Biden's new CIA director, who is very China friendly, and Bill Gates. And the big media and big tech, they all gathered together for the secret meeting. So every single year they've been having these secret meetings, starting in 1983 when there was 50 corporations. And what they did was they kept, the big corporations would take over the smaller corporations, and then take over. And every single year it got down to, so today, and in the last, 8 years or so, I don't know exactly, but we've had only 6 corporations controlling the mass of information of everything you see and hear in the mainstream media. And as you know, big tech as well, Twitter, Facebook, Google, YouTube, Instagram, all the big tech as well is controlling our perceptions. And so they can control our perceptions in a way that always puts the narrative, as all of you know, toward their agenda. Mm-hmm. And today we have, I can't say certain words because of that. And we are currently under an attack. And it's a psychological attack. It's unconventional warfare. And the Nazis were eugenicists. So I think, and one of the reasons they kept it secret, why it answered my own question after I researched for many years, is because they want to basically keep us technologically in this retarded state. After the hearing for the scientists was denied to bring forth to show that we have these advanced technologies, Dr. Greer set up a corporation. We had a database of about 300 scientists and inventors. And I spent 10 years, I started out working with Professor Loiter, and we would fly around the planet and meet with these scientists, brilliant minds and inventors, out of the garage or full-on scientists that would have and claim to have over unity type technology. And I have a pretty good technical background because I worked with the Naval Electronic Engineering Center for many decades. I was a broadcast engineer and worked with Dr. Marcel Vogel, in a laboratory, as you know. So I had a pretty good background of unconventional science. And so for 10 years, I met with scientists and inventors, and it was just like one horror story after another. People were suicided, murdered, most received national security orders. And so after 10 years, I completely gave up. I realized they have such a control over this that will not release. They have thousands and thousands of patents having to do with anti-gravity, free energy, superconductivity. Thousands of world-changing inventions have been suppressed. But it's interesting that the Navy has released Star Trek-like patents of fusion reactors that could put out terawatts of power, force fields, warp drives. I mean, just incredible patents that they don't just say it's theoretical, but operational. And so I think this is part of a beginning soft disclosure, and that's what I believe the Space Force is all about. It's to lead us into accepting that we have this incredible technology. One of the things that inspired was a hacker in the UK after he heard the testimonies of my friend Donna Hare, who worked 20 years at NASA, where they're airbrushing the UFOs out, and astronauts are told to keep secret what happened when they went to the moon in 1969. Obviously, they had to drop in some Stanley Kubrick footage, and so the people back at home couldn't see what was actually going on the moon. But it inspired Gary McKinnon, who hacked into the Naval Space Command computers and saw the Solar Warden U.S. Navy secret space program. It was launched back in the 1980s. The huge kilometers-long battle cruisers. They have, like, I think 8 of them up there, and they had non-terrestrial officers list, and the names of the ships were, like, curiously the U with 3 S's, not 2 S's, USSSS Hillenkotter and the Lee May. It's interesting that Curtis Lee May was one of the MJ-12 members, and actually Hillenkotter was the first CIA director, and MJ1 of the first MJ12 group that Truman set up. So it would be appropriate, you know, to be named that way. You know, the poor guy, they wanted to put him away for 70 years in prison because he wanted to find out the truth for himself, and so he hacked in and found out. Now we have a number of secret space program witnesses. I call them the 21st century witnesses because they're having total memory recall after 20 years of their tour of duty in space. And it started in 1980. So like some of the first testimonies coming out started in the year 2000, 20 years later, such as, what was his name? Yeah, got a blank. Anyway, you know, there's a whole bunch of secret space program witnesses of which I know personally and I've interviewed with, and a lot of them had experiences with the med beds where they, you know, can have arm or leg chopped off, they can regenerate it, they can reverse age you, they can memory wipe you so you don't remember your 20 years of service duty. I mean, they have like science fiction like technologies that have been keeping Earth in this bubble of you know, the Nazis called this plan Weltanschauungskrieg, which means worldview warfare. They wanted to create, using full spectrum dominance, a matrix of perception, kind of like a little Truman Show, I guess you could say, where we believe we're at a certain technological level, and that you know, it's a crime. It's a crime against humanity because we should have been at a much higher level of technology and a lot less suffering on this planet if it wasn't for these nefarious elements that have been operating behind the scenes, creating a matrix of perception that is using deception in order to hide these truths. And so I'm honored here to join all of you, and I can do what I can in answering some questions.
Yeah, of course. And of course, I always just want to give you the floor and just let you, you know, get most of the story out. I'm very familiar myself with the Nazis and how Hitler was very involved with researching Vimanas and all of the occult knowledge during World War II, instead of spending money on all of the ammunitions and different types of weapon systems. He was actually looking, is what I heard, for all of this secret doctrines and things around the world that he could actually use. And apparently in India, those Vimanas and the history of those flying saucer machines that they had there was of his top interest. And so he created the Nazi Bell. But yeah, I've been keeping up with a lot of the stories that are out there, all the conspiracies and things revolving around the events of World War II and thereafter. And I'm not sure, you know, how much of it is true, because you hear about the story of Admiral Byrd and how he actually flew past the poles and into the entrance of Hollow Earth, or Agartha, where he was met with some other human-like people, and they sent a message back with him, you know, in regards to their presence, but they would not interact with us until we reached a higher state of consciousness. But I don't know how much of that is true. I don't know.
Oh, it's very true. I sat down at the Hilton before we went to the press conference with Mark McCandish, and he knew I had a technical background, and he went over the schematic of the alien reproduction vehicle, which used Mercury in the center column with the Tesla configuration in order to cancel the mass. The Nazi Hannibal series, they use these tacking, if I can't pronounce it correctly, but they have swirling Mercury engines, just like the Vermatas. And it's interesting that there was two Nazi U-boats that were sunk. One was off the coast of Norway that had like 83 tons of mercury in sealed containers, and Another one going probably near Antarctica. They were both sunk, and they had, and one's creating an environmental problem up by Norway, both filled with mercury. And so they were using mercury for their anti-gravity craft for their secret space program down in Antarctica. So absolutely.
Okay, yeah, I try to follow all of those little streams of knowledge. I just traverse many different realms to try to figure out what's going on here on this plane, because there's so many different rabbit trails you can follow, but how much of it is truth and how much of it is real, this is what we're trying to discern in this world right now. And we do know that free energy technology exists, and there's evidence of it everywhere. But and I don't, were you familiar, did you happen to watch the citizens disclosure event that happened at the US Press Club? It was actually for the
2013, I was invited to go there, but had a conflict with that. Dr. Greer didn't even know about it. I, contacted him. I said, "Are you going to show?" He said, "Oh no, it sounds like a kangaroo court." But he did show up, and he gave his testimony. In fact, his testimony, basically, an NSA employee told him that by October 1954, definitely we had achieved anti-gravity.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all. They just have been wanting to keep all of the power to themselves, is what we've been dealing with. And now they can't, I don't think they're going to win much longer, this whole truth movement thing that's happening right now, because it's a whole consciousness shift. But I've also been aware of David Adair's work with the rockets and everything. He has an incredible story about.
Oh, he does.
And so I guess you had an opportunity to meet David Adair then. Did you meet him during the press conference?
I met him back in the 90s, or back in the 1990s, but I haven't met him since. But I love the guy. What he has to say is so important. And I think his testimony, mine was a lot more mild, compared to his. So I think what the issue was, it was just a little bit too much, for the mainstream audience to wrap their head around that testimony that he gave. Mm-hmm. But still, 57 different extraterrestrial species by 1989. They had to do a limited hangout in order to keep the public from saying what, seeing what happened. They effectively, across all the networks, they just basically followed CNN's lead. They get the talking points centrally, and they distribute them to all their outlets. When I was an ABC newsman, it was back in the late 70s. We had teletypes of UPI and AP, and I would rip them off, and I would do the weekend news report. I was like no big TV anchor, newsman, or anything like that. I would just read it on the radio, and I had no idea who was composing the text in a certain way to give a certain perception, but it is centrally controlled in such a way that the narrative supports the agenda that is hidden from the American people.
Yes, we know that all of Hollywood is run by the CIA, and that BlackRock is actually the organization that controls everything. And that is owned and operated by a very small few amount of people. Most people don't know that kind of knowledge, but I've gone deep into all of this, and I follow all kinds of things. And like I said, I've just been wanting to know the truth as well for all of this stuff. Kim, you have a question?
Well, I have a question in the chat from Katie.
Okay.
Question is, what can you say on the positive off-worlders working with the Alliance?
Well, besides Gary McKinnon was inspired by the 2001 event, it also inspired my good friend Dr. Michael Salla, who, after he was looking into this, he was a teaching professor and they fired him because of his interest in the UFO topic, because it wasn't approved curricula, you know. So he's been doing full-on research, and from his sources and things, it sounds as though, I have no way of verifying this, that throughout our solar system, that they have been taking down these dark elements throughout our solar system. And it appears that maybe Earth will be the last part that it cleans house. And so it sounds like the Galactic Federation, or whatever name it is, that the group that first met with Eisenhower back in February 1954, where Eisenhower actually had planned to have public disclosure on radio and television in like 2 or 3 months. It was February, March, April, May. Yeah, in 3 months, he was planning on having disclosure, according to a document by Gerald Light, who was one of the people who witnessed the meeting there at Muroc Air Force Base, which is now called Edwards Air Force Base. One of the other witnesses that were there was Cardinal Francis McIntyre. And we know from authenticated MJ12 documents just earlier, before this meeting in 1952, that the Catholic Church was working with the government and the Secretary of War, as what it was called back then, to have containment for the Vatican, to have that if there was ever mass sightings, they'd want to have containment. They didn't want the public to know about the extraterrestrials. So, and there's a lot of connections and documents showing the connection with the Vatican, the Nazis, and the CIA, and a reptilian race that, as Professor Herman Oberth said, we had help from people from other worlds, which is referring to. And so what happened was Cardinal Francis McIntyre, he broke his security oath and immediately flew to the Pope and spilled the beans on the whole thing. And so I've been researching secret societies, Knights of Malta, Freemasons, Skull and Bones, and so forth. And Eisenhower was a Knight of Malta. And you have to basically, you kind of have a loyalty, to the Pope.
Yes.
And so I think what happened was, the conflict that happened was that the Vatican, I'm speculating here based on documented evidence, came in and stopped that from happening. But later that same year, they cut a deal with a group from Orion, with the Greys, that performed abductions in exchange for technology, but like the Galactic Federation warned them, they couldn't be trusted. And then eventually in 1955, there was a full-on surrender agreement with the Nazis and their alliance. But it appears that the Dr. Sala's research work substantiates that in working, like such as people like William Tompkins, who was an information disseminator, who actually worked at the same place my father was working in the 1940s at Naval Air Station San Diego, where they were meeting with 29 Navy spies that were embedded into the Nazi secret space program. They were coming back with packets of information, and we were attempting to catch up. And so his job was to meet with these operatives and Admiral Rick Oboda, who was in charge of it, and disseminate it to Lockheed, to McDonnell Douglas and universities, and try to some of it was like alien hieroglyphics, and it was quite a job to try to figure out what the technology was that the Germans were doing that was so far in advance of the United States. So yeah, we were desperately trying to catch up, but they had quite a 2-decade advance on us.
Yes. Well, we're going to get to a question in just a second. I just wanted to add to what you were saying about the Galactic Federation. So I have been wondering why these entities, whatever they are, these beings, the ones who worship Satan. Satan is Saturn. Most people don't know this. This is part of Jordan Maxwell's work. But I last year I went into meditation in regards to this, because I'm like, why are they worshiping Saturn everywhere? Everywhere we have Saturn imagery and representation and symbolism and all of this. And so I had a meditation last year where I downloaded information that Saturn is actually infested and controlled by artificial intelligence. And this comes after actually my studying some of the work that Norman Berggren had done on the rings of Saturn. There's actually a book that he put out called The Ring Makers of Saturn. You can't even hardly get that book. It's very expensive if you do try to find one. And he saw that they were created by these huge, hundreds of miles long ships. He was an astronomer, and he saw the size of these things are like at least 200 miles in length. And they were actually creating it because he showed a slide presentation where on one side of this structure, you have the rings, and on the other side, there's no rings. And so I don't know if you're familiar with the North Pole of Saturn that actually has a hexagon that is made of the clouds. And then all of the moons, are kind of strange, but Iapetus represents the Death Star of Star Wars. I mean, it's like a carbon copy cutout of the Death Star. So what do we have going on? And a person who studies cymatics, which is sound waves, saw the hexagon at the North Pole of Saturn and said, that's a sound wave. That is being artificially created somehow. And then that hexagon is what represents the cube shape that we see globally. At these corporations, when you see a cube in any form, usually it's in a statue shape and it's just outside of a corporation, it represents Saturn. And the square on top of the heads of our graduates, the students who graduate from college or high school, that cube represents Saturn, that square. And then we have over in Mecca, they circle around the cube over there, the black cube of Saturn. And the people spiraling around the cube also represent Saturn's rings. So we have all of this Saturn worship everywhere, literally everywhere. And then when the Nike swoop actually is representing the ring of Saturn, in its own way, they do it everywhere. Then we have car makers called Saturn. What is it? And then when that download came, I was like, oh, wow, that's kind of connects with all the weird anomalous stuff that's going on over there. So I decided, since I do the hypnosis from Dolores Cannon, I asked one of my clients that I knew I would be able to ask, what they could remote view of Saturn. And what came out was that they saw a hive mind, like they sensed this hive mind there on Saturn, but that there was a shielding that was blocking their view of the actual land of Saturn. They couldn't see on the planet itself because it's like some sort of, I guess, psychic shielding or AI shielding. I'm not sure. It's just interesting that you were talking about the Galactic Federation and how there's a great war going on. and how in my heart of hearts, I just feel like we are living Star Wars and we've just been lied to on every level, you know? So
It's exciting on one side, you know, it's we don't have a boring life here on planet Earth, and there's nothing, you know, you get born, you die, you work all your life, and then that's it. You know, it's like there's a whole lot more, whole other layers of incredible excitingness that though as you dig into it all, it can be very disturbing too. But the potential for transformation is you know, space is the limit.
yes.
But you know, as a military intelligence post once said, you know, symbolism will be their downfall. Speaking of military intelligence, a little in my research of the secret space program witnesses, you know, this would make sense. I don't have absolute documented proof of this, but I have witness testimonies and the situations that happened that during, you know, here you have a 5-star general, General Eisenhower, who became our president. And he was an incredible military mind that planned the Normandy invasion. You think he would just kind of roll over and say, oh, you didn't denied me access, and I guess I can just get a little report and then just turn it over to Kennedy. You think he would just roll over and not do anything like set up a secret US Marine Corps intelligence unit that would operate in the background to protect our constitutional republic in the future if this Nazi infiltration ever got completely out of hand to destroy our constitutional republic? Well, according to Michael Gerloff and Randy Kramer, 2 secret space program witnesses. I know Randy Kramer passed a polygraph exam. Both of them collaborate in saying that President Eisenhower, he set up this secret US Marine Corps intelligence unit to act as an institutional safeguard in the future. And when in 2017, and it was October, that end of October, beginning of November, there were posts on the back channels of the internet, and it went on for 3 years because they couldn't communicate directly. See, I can talk about this without talking about it, so it won't get censored. They can't do it through the mainstream media outlets because they're all compromised and controlled. They'd have to do it through the back channels of the internet to awaken people to that these military operations are operating in the background. And so how you can tell is, like, if it was just, you know, somebody just making up a story, just, you know, bogus thing, the media just went bonkers. You know, it went, you know, this is a violent, deranged conspiracy Nazi cult, you know, that you don't want to look into what they're saying, you know. And so with that 17th letter of the alphabet. And so I've read through all of those posts, you know, for the 3 years. I like to pull in as much information as I can from many sources and just evaluate it and see if it makes sense with everything else. But, you know, when you consider that the NSA was headed by Admiral Mike Rogers back then, and that they have all the evidence, and the Kraken, which is a supercomputer using artificial intelligence tracking all the illegal financial transactions, and the hundreds of thousands of sealed indictments, and in other words, they have all the evidence on all these people. But because the media, the thing I talk about the most, that because the media has weaponized the public, brainwashed the public, and if any type of operation was to come forward like that, because of the public being weaponized with this false information, they would use it to turn against these operations. And so the period that we're going through right now, as I'm sure all of you notice, is a time while the deep state has, control of our control of the White House, and the public gets to see, because as they said, you can't tell the people about it. The people have to witness it and see it for their own eyes. And so that's the period we're going through right now, is more people are becoming awake that we have these nefarious elements that have infiltrated our country. And so I think there's got to be a precipice, as they say, where it just gets to this point where, the white hats could come out, and that's my hope anyway, or else it would go into the other direction. But I'm tending to believe that, considering that the Director of National Intelligence was given the report to the military that we've definitely had interference from China, and that basically the military now has all the evidence. And so the military, according to our laws and everything, we're under a provisional military, and we have like two presidents. One's an executive president, the other one's a commander-in-chief of the military president. And so we'll see what happens next.
Yes, very much so. I mean, we've got a lot to consider in the coming days. But we do have a question from Katie. Katie, she says that you might already know this answer, or maybe not. I don't know, but it's many of the tribunals that are going on by the off-worlders for crimes against the universe. Are there tribunals going on? What is it? Would have feeling many of the tribunals going on is by the off-worlders, is for crimes against the universe by certain deep state members. Do that's really going on? And do you know anything about any of that off-world military tribunals? I'm sorry, I can't keep up with the chat that much.
Yeah, I was sitting in on the meeting outside of Jupiter and happened to, no, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah, well, and members, please go ahead and, raise your hands.
Yeah, I love when people ask questions. There's so many
we have
questions that need to be answered, and a pretty savvy group here, I can tell.
Yes.
So
just looking here,
but I'd love to get some good questions.
Yes. Do you know anything about the Tesla free energy that's coming?
Well, considering I spent 10 years with scientists, inventors, and I'm studying a lot of patents. I work with the Bedini brothers and Professor Tom Bearden. I don't know of anything personally, but it would be only logical that if this deep state gets taken down, not only the medical technologies, but they have, you can imagine, with trillions of dollars and some of the most brilliant minds and the assistance of races that are thousands of years in advance, this stuff they've got hidden away is way better than anything any of us can come up with on planet Earth. So it may be one of the reasons why I'm just speculating that one of the reasons they keep us from, because if any energy device came out that was kind of lame, but still, if you had a little device that produced 2,000-3,000 watts and didn't the size of a shoebox, you know, they would start factories and making them like crazy, all over the whole planet. And then you'd have third world countries coming up in more power. But it would be like in fact, one inventor was this Dutch scientist that was able to prove in a laboratory we set up out in Virginia. His technology had a little box, about 140 watts of power. He was going to Europe, but he's found dead in a parking lot with a heart attack on the way going to Europe to patent it. So they would want to squash something like that for multiple reasons. One of them would be that you don't want to have like some lame technology going out there when you can have like this incredible technology that's been hidden away that could, you know, we don't need roads. We have anti-gravity. We can desalinate the oceans. Our technologies can work in harmony with Earth rather than polluting the Earth. We don't have overpopulation problems. You can colonize any place on Earth. You have, you know, other planets in the system. We can relocate people if there's like population density, but I don't think that's a problem. I think it's more the global elite want to have too many people. It's hard to control. They need to reduce the population dramatically, like the Georgia Guidestones of 500 million people, and then they can manage them and be slaves for their world that they create. And they put this stuff out in Hollywood movies, you know, where they have med beds and things where you have people like fighting amongst themselves, but the elite have all this wonderful technology. That's the and they know the secret societies tied in with this, and I've done quite a bit of research as well. There's definitely a connection with, as all of you know, being part of the connecting consciousness, that there is a collective mind that we're all connected into, and each one of us is participatory in the collective reality that as we believe. And so I believe there's this huge awakening going on right now, and it's going to be like a tsunami that it's going to be hard for them to to hold back on.
Yeah, as we know that Hollywood is, they put truth in movies. Andrea, I noticed you put your hand down. Did you have a question still? We do have a couple of other questions though from other members. Brandon? Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Go ahead, Andrea.
Hi, everyone. Well, this is not necessarily a question, but what really just touched me as far as, you know, the highly evolved beings. When I was trying to basically get in touch with my spiritual side, or my spirituality, whatever you want to call it, years ago, I came across the books by Neil Donald Walsh, Conversation with God. I don't know if you all heard of him, but he started writing in 1975. Anyway, he came out with a book in 2020 that is called The Great Awakening. And the whole book basically goes is about highly evolved beings, and how as normal humans, you know, more or less like asleep humans, whatever, it's hard for us to grasp. But, you know, if we basically finally wake up and we can realize how we can have such a collective future from everyone on our planet. And it was so interesting because it's a spiritual book. So everything I've been listening to the last hour, it's like, wow, you know, it is kind of in that book, and it's definitely worth reading. I just wanted to throw that out there, and I hope, you know, it was not completely off the subject here.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea.
You're so welcome.
How about
Thank
Brandon?
you. It's been great.
How about Brandon? I bet Brandon's got some questions.
Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay, cool. First, thanks for coming to see us, Dan. My questions are going to focus. I could talk about any topic for hours. I'm also into IT and technology and development. My questions are going to revolve around your experience with, especially with the military. When the first one I want to ask is when did you leave the military? How long were you in?
I came in the military in February 1968, and I was in for 4 years. Served in combat action on the rivers of Vietnam, and most of the time I was in naval communications.
Okay. Are you so I'm actually involved with a couple of groups. We realized real quickly that I figured out when I was a kid in the early 90s that these guys were setting up systems to corral. They were trying to put us in farms. We saw what they were doing quickly. So I started to join groups of underground scientists to try to build our own technology, to try to kind of counter what they were doing. We knew we were hopelessly outnumbered, but we tried anyway. Um, there's a couple of guys. There's a guy who has a YouTube channel called Alien Scientist who has debunked people like Bob Lazar, Edgar Fouché, and many others, which you've spoken about. I'd like to try to find a way to. They seem to be true, but there's so much misinformation. And I know Mockingbird's involved because they speak the truth. Unfortunately, Edgar passed away. But do you know? Can you elaborate on what they spoke about is true or not? Because I know Edgar was part of Area 51, and he spoke about the technology he worked on to reverse engineer some of the stuff that they had. But your experience, did you hear anything about it? Did you know? Because there's a lot of other guys out there who are trying to make their own 0-point energy, who try to make their own anti-gravity, who debunk what these guys are saying. And I got into a heated discussion with them, but it'd be nice to hear your perspective on that.
Brandon, are you saying that he debunked Bob Lazar?
Yes, he has an entire series on YouTube debunking Bob Lazar, and I'm like, how can he's a PhD in physics, but I'm like, anyway, so we went back and forth, and because we were trying to develop our own technology, and but I'm like, if it's already been done before, I don't want to keep reinventing the wheel, and there was a lot of internal conflict going on, and I'm just curious, if you can, with your background, you have firsthand experience. I've got other stuff too, like the TR-3B, the triangle. If you're familiar with that, and some of the Russian stuff. There's the in Siberia, the Russian defense network. If you're familiar with that, there's some kind of radioactive area in Siberia. They've tried to. They can't really go into because it's so dangerous. But these domes come out of the ground. And they actually have it where they actually shot with a direct energy weapon and destroyed an asteroid that was supposed to hit us. And the Russians talk about it openly, but our government covers it up. So I've got tons of stuff on various technology. But my first question was, Bob Lazar, Edgar Fouché, and there's a few others I can't remember, and their experiences with Area 51.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. I'm really familiar with Bob Lazar's testimony. By the way, if you go to the webmatrix.net and it's chronological, everything. So if you go to 1993, you have the video of them plus a transcription of the whole interview. The fact that he knew about element 115 being stable way before then, the fact that they couldn't erase phone books that they got put out, so he was in the phone book. The man is to say that he debunked them, the nature of that craft. Now, Bob's main complaint was because of the compartmentalization, that you couldn't share with other scientists in order to have a greater you'd be able to move forward on this much to much greater extent. The craft was, the Zeta Reticuli craft it was all seamless, and using the gravity wave amplifiers with the element 115 to 100% efficient thermal conductor, thermal electric converter to power these gravity wave amplifiers and everything. They just didn't have, they got part of it, but they didn't have all the information. But they've been able to have, as Mark McCandish, there were other designs that they were able to do with the Tesla configuration using Mercury that were able to achieve anti-gravity, but they weren't able to really make a lot of progress on the Zeta Reticuli craft. It's like a whole, and the craft is controlled, mentally with as Tesla shared with Otis Carr the design, and Tesla was in communication with Maria Orsic, who was getting the channelings, and they started with the Viral craft, and both the OTC-1, which was which Ralph Ring was one of the pilots, were all used with consciousness in order to pilot the craft, to move the craft around. Unlike the Nazi Hanabu, which was a different type of technology, and the alien reproduction vehicles, they were a different type of technology. They were using kind of 1950s stuff, where they were doing things. But I am pretty much of a believer in knowing, meeting with Bob Lazar and knowing the whole history of how Edward Tiller, brought him in because of one of the scientists that accidentally cut up one of the reactors, and they killed him. They had a replacement, and he was putting out a rocket car, and he's a creative. You got to be kind of an out of the box type of scientist in order to, if you're just one of these PhDs that basically are good at passing the tests and you don't have the creative ability or the intuitive ability, it's that type of scientist that you would want to bring into that type of thing. And the fact that he's been 100% consistent, he hasn't been, he came out with his book, and his testimony kind of goes along with what in New York Times with Professor Eric Davis, who's claiming that we haven't made much progress, which kind of goes against Mike Tuber and Mark McCandish's testimony. In regards to what Bob Lazar was working on, that's true. They haven't made much progress. And that's kind of what Admiral Wilson met with astrophysicist Dr. Eric Davis in 2002, and it got leaked on the internet, the transcript of the recording. And they basically said that they haven't made much progress and things like that, but that's not the full story.
Well, thank you. I'm sure we could spend hours discussing these finer details, but my main question was to get clarity on that, so I can kind of go back, because I might send you an email. If you're connected to other people, I've kind of wanted to get involved with building these new technologies. There's a lot of competition. There's other people out there that are trying to do that. They're aware that these patents are going to get released. As part of my discussion, I wanted to talk with Kim and Ellen about, as far as sending ideas to Simon, as far as the next steps to take, as far as getting different ways to produce food and energy going forward, and getting them funded or whatever. I'm one of those guys that I'm science and engineer minded, but I'm also intuitive, so I'm also very creative, and I've tried to find others like me to help us start these companies. And I knew there was a lot of suppression going on, so we just kept quiet. We stayed underground. We heard a lot of bad stuff. I have other people who were in the military as well who told me, hey, don't talk about that. You need to be quiet.
Right.
And
Well,
it's like, I discovered. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I said it's true. Yeah, it's a horror story of what they do
Yes.
with people.
Mhm.
I'm still in contact with some of the scientists. One, he had his vehicles blown up. He was thrown in prison, got a national security order. He had 60,000 of these little energy devices that could put out about 150 watts or so, building it out of Japan. He got a national security order. When you get one of these orders that says your invention has been deemed to be a detriment to the national security of the United States, you cannot share it with anybody. And so it basically shuts it down. But he came up with another energy device. And yeah, maybe I did a show with him once. I was able to talk him into coming on a show, but you got to be careful with this kind of thing. One thing he did, which was so fascinating, was that all of you have heard about the Philadelphia experiment, where 1943 they were able to make the ship invisible using Tesla generators, using rotating magnetic fields. One of those generators from the USS Eldridge ended up in a Navy scrapyard, and he was able to acquire it back in the 70s. And it was pretty banged up, and he worked on it for years, and he finally got it going. It opened up a dimensional portal into the wall. And if you go to the 1943 timeline on the webmatrix.net, there's a link to a photograph that his secretary took with a Brownie Instamatic camera when the wall, it kind of looked like it was wavering like this, and this creature came out of the wall and was saying to her telepathically, what are you people doing? What do you want? And she took a picture of it. And it's a very clear picture of this creature. And the doctor was in the other room, and he could see the wall was doing this wavering thing. He didn't realize that it was opening up this portal. And another thing he did was an experiment with a rat in a cage with a 2-inch cutting block with cheese on the other end, and was able to open up the molecular structure with this device, which he says is pretty huge. Energy generator from the Tesla company was made by. He said he can make it smaller. I'm sure he can. But the rat was able to walk right through the 2-inch wood cutting block, and he was able to dissect the rat and found out some of the wood had merged with the rat's DNA. So it's not like perfect or anything like that. So it gives credibility to the fact that the Philadelphia experiment did happen, and the sailors on board had a horrific experience of coming back with being merged with part of the ship.
Wonderful, thank you.
Any other questions?
Oh, you've got all kinds of them coming at you, I think. Let's go with Cheryl. Do you want to ask your question, Cheryl?
Yeah, Dan, thank you for being here. I wanted to ask you if you know if they have any type of technology that can clean the mercury and the radiation out of our oceans.
One of the secret space program witnesses, Emery Smith, who worked there was like several levels deep underneath Kirkland Air Force Base. He was a surgical technician. And he's also an energy inventor. He said we can clean the entire oceans. It's hard for me to conceive this, but he says they have the technology to clean, the whole Fukushima mess that was created. That could be done in less than a month.
That's incredible. Have you met any of the other 57 races they spoke of?
Have I, say again?
Have you ever met any of the other 57 alien races they spoke of?
Oh, I've just had very limited experiences, more of a teaching experiences I had back in the 1977 with some interesting experiences that happened that year. But other than that, I haven't had any actually physically gone on board, sort of, in the past, unlike some people. But I would love to have that experience I've had them fly 100 feet over my head and glowing, and I know that's either made in USA or made elsewhere.
Yeah.
Um,
I know a few months back, I was listening to one of the websites that the Galactic Federation was speaking on, and they said that they were working on cleaning up the radiation at Fukushima and at Russia. So I thought, wow, that's really interesting, and someone who can do that. So I find that very interesting.
Yeah, wouldn't that be incredible? The reactor that just keeps spewing out. They send robots in there, and the robots die, from
They melt.
the electronics wipe out. So yeah, it's so sick and ridiculous that we use such a dangerous power generation technology.
Well, thank you for your info. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your question. Any other questions?
John Bacon, did that just answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you. And Dan, this is very interesting. Thank you for sharing. I'm pretty new to a lot of this information. It's very exciting. Thank you. I'll let somebody else go.
Thanks. How about Becca?
Ellen, yeah, could you help me translate my hearing? I've lost like half my hearing. I get a VA disability for it. The audio is like breaking up kind of a little bit. Can you somebody help translate the question?
Yeah, he was basically just saying that he was new to all of this information, but he was thanking you for that information that you're giving tonight.
Oh, my pleasure, John. Great to be with all of you.
So I think, Becca, you had a very compound question, so I'm going to let you ask.
Okay, hi, how are you? I actually had two separate questions. So one, I keep hearing different things about China and their connection to the big tech companies and the deep state, and I don't really understand what those connections are, and I'd like to.
Oh, please,
to
I have something I made that specifically answers that question in detail. If you go to thewebmatrix.net and then click on a link there at the top called Enemy of the People. And it goes into the whole history and the connection with Chinese Communist Party and all of the media and the agenda, and goes all the way back to the history of the control of the media. So on that part of your question,
Okay.
And I'll try to answer too as best as I can, but I just wanted to share that with you.
Okay, I will check that out. And my other question, the other day I was on Dr. Michael Sala's website, and I started listening to an interview with the French archaeologist Elena Danan. And it was quite a long interview, and she went into quite a lot of very interesting things, but she was also at one point talking about how I believe it was the Galactic Federation and some Pleiadian groups that were trying to rescue human captives on various planets in our galaxy. And at one point she mentioned how the Syrian, well, I don't know if it's a planet or a star, whatever, but she said it was controlled by the Dark Fleet, which I assume is the Nazis, and that there were millions of humans held captive there, and that they were being very cautious as far as all of these rescue missions because they don't want to harm people. But I was wondering, how did all these humans get to these other places in the galaxy? How long have they been there? And are they going through a consciousness shift as we are, and waking up and taking charge of their own consciousness at this time?
Oh, excellent questions, Becca. Um, to address that, in when the Nazis came over in 1946, they had the underground base mastermind, Xavier Dorsch, come over into the Monsanto Mountains just outside of Kirkland Air Force Base in New Mexico. And they started tunneling out, and then they started branching out all across the United States, where they have hundreds of these huge, massive, deep underground military bases that are connected with tunnels, with maglev trains, rapid transports. Not only is there a huge amount of, as we're becoming more, people are becoming more aware of the human trafficking that's going on planet Earth, and the horrific things that are being done, and the people that are down in these dumbs, and you hear about the millions of missing people and some people in the national forests and things like that. They'll be walking along and all of a sudden their steps stop and they disappear, and there's absolutely no explanation for it whatsoever. There definitely appears to be a human slave trade that's galactic, that's going on, and these operations sadly are apparently going on with the people that are missing, and nobody has any idea on what's going on underneath our feet in these deep underground military bases. That there is just a lot of evidence that there is and it's kind of interesting, the different things that come up. I things catch my attention, such as the British Interplanetary Society. I think it was like in 2015, they met together some of the most brilliant minds, and they all, for a hypothetical situation, what if you had a Nazi dictator on Mars that was running a slave operation? How would you overthrow them? And then you have Obama doing the Space Act, which would basically, the language was such that if corporations were using slave labor on off-planet mining, that they could be exempt from being held liable for these operations. And so it seems apparent that, especially since the Nazis in 1942 established a moon base, and they established operations on Mars, which the head of the Israeli space program actually came out publicly and said, we have joint extraterrestrial human operations and underground facilities on Mars. All these little leaks come out that kind of indicate that, yeah, we have all these things going on out in space that have been kept secret all this time, and they're trying to cover their butts. But I believe that, I don't have any firsthand information, and Dr. Sala has, his sources of information. And I hope it's all true, that they're cleaning house of these, and then they're going to be using like the Artemis Accord, which is kind of an agreement between all these different countries, except Russia and China, I think, on the list, to work collaborate together on not having human rights abuse in our solar system, to respect people. And we don't have to have slaves. We don't have to do the Nazi the Nazi thing where they brought down all their slaves with them in these huge submarines down to Antarctica to continue these operations. Like, it works great for the corporate bottom line to have free labor. All you have to do is feed these slaves. But this is not right. This is not the way we want to evolve spiritually. We have to honor every human being. And I believe that it's going to Nice kitty cat. It's going to move in that direction.
Yeah, because it just seems so huge. I mean, we're going to try to create new Earth here on Earth, but when you think of all these humans, many of them maybe have been born off planet and don't know if Earth still exists, or just it's kind of mind blowing to think
Right.
of, and just all the suffering and everywhere in our galaxy. So that makes it even more just
Totally. And the Chinese Communist Party, they wine and dine and bring, people, CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, all they wine and dine them over in China. And then the fact that they're having these secret meetings in Sun Valley, Idaho, along with Bill Gates and the new CIA friendly Biden selected CIA director, with all of big media and big tech, CNN, New York Times, MSNBC, all of them. And they're all coordinating together an agenda. Something's rotten in Denmark, as they say.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel very hopeful that we will prevail, as all the star seeds and everything here on Earth. So I'm just hoping that on the other planets, the star seeds are there too, and assisting the human beings and the benevolent beings that are our cousins on other planets.
There's a lot more of us than there is of them, and their main tool is secrecy and deception, and using psychological warfare in order to deceive us. Our power is in disclosing these things like we're doing here, and in speaking truth. It's much harder to cover up lies. All the glitches in the matrix of lies start to come out, whereas when you're speaking truth, the truth just keeps validating itself. So there's a much greater power in truth, and especially one that's aligned with the universe. And I believe the universe is aligned with love. And so we have that greater alignment of power behind us, I believe.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, I have this book, actually. It was published, I think, in 1990 by this woman from Canada named Barbara Ham Clow. It's called the Pleiadian Agenda. I found it in a library book sale, but she has this map of our galaxy, and it shows the Earth being in a very small window of light, like that. There's only like a 2,000 year period where we have enough exposure to light that we can actually wake up, and then the other planets in our galaxy, I guess, have more access to the light. So I guess we're very easy to hold hostage until we get to that window where we can wake up. So when I read that, I had assumed that that's what Jesus meant by the 1,000 years of peace, because it probably takes us 500 years to wake up, and then we start going back down cycling back down into a dark age again after about 1,500 years. But it's kind of interesting to think about.
We're definitely at this point in the timeline that something's got to give.
Yeah, well, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for your question, Becca.
Thank you.
Hey, how about Tony? I think Tony, you got a question?
Yes, I did. Yes. Hi, Dan. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Tony.
Hi. Okay, so I had two questions that I wrote down, but I was thinking as you all were talking is that I think that, well, the main agenda behind all of this nefarious goings on has a lot to do with money, power, control, that sort of thing. So once you take that away from these people that are so, powerful or whatever, once you take that away, they don't really have much behind them that they can keep going. So do you think that, you know, you hear about the QFS, the quantum financial system, the, you know, all of these new currencies and things that are coming online. Do you think that's going to really kick in sometime soon, and people are going to start to be awakened to that, and we're going to just kind of change over a whole system? So these elites and, you know, deep state and whatnot will just, they won't go away, but, you know, they'll fight to the end. But do you think that's going to be something that will happen fairly soon?
Well, as Rothschild once said, you know, give me control of a country's money and I care not who makes the laws. And that seems to be the fundamental of how they bribe people or blackmail people, or, you know, people have given positions of power. You have all these assets that are complicit in this agenda that's moving forward. And a lot of it, it's either, you know, threats or bribery with money. And a lot of people sell out for the big bucks. You know, look at the hospitals, look how much money they're getting for classifying the deaths and cases of people. I mean, that should be illegal. And everything's driven by money. If you don't do what we say, you could lose your job, you know, which everybody's dependent upon in order to survive on this planet with finances. And I thought about that with the QFS, the quantum financial system, since it's I'm not any authority on this by any means. I'm just, you know, like you, I'm just, you know, researching it on the superficial level, that it appears that it would be very hard to do these corruption operations with everything being you know, tracked that way. And there's this, you know, other feeling that, you know, everything goes digital, and people like to feel like, oh, there's gold or something, you know, that's backing your money. And if everything was digital, that doesn't sounds like kind of like the you know, mark of the beast type of thing, you know, where everything is centrally controlled by one thing. And so I understand the quantum financial system is going to be backed with gold. So I don't know, but it sounds hopeful if it can stop all these. I mean, when you think about all of the trillions of dollars of all these criminal enterprises going on all over this planet, and when you have people that are homeless and people and even veterans that are homeless, everybody could be living a much higher level of living, while these people that are abusing our system criminally, if that could be stopped, that's got to be a good thing.
Yes, I believe so too. The QFS is, I believe, from what I gather and what I've, you know, just researched a bit about, is that it's not only gold backed, but it's also consciousness backed. So that if anyone nefarious or anyone wants to do anything that is not on the up and up and not for the gains of all humanity, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for them. So there's a consciousness element to it as well as the, you know, gold-backed currency. So I don't know if that's a quantum computer that is doing that, but it does have a consciousness element to it. So, which is cool. I mean, to me, I think it's fantastic, and that kind of keeps the, you know, the bad people at bay, because they can't get involved in it. now they're trying to hold on to the fiat currency. They're doing everything they can, from, you know, taking people's money out of their accounts and using it for whatever. Now that's what I've heard, so I don't have proof of that. But anyway, it's just interesting that that is coming about, and I believe it is. I believe there's a big shift in that whole realm of money, and I think that's one of the big reasons that the elites are going to be going away, because they don't have anything to hold on to.
Sounds like an important component.
Yeah, definitely. So my other thing was, have you ever heard of a broad range replicator?
Once again,
It's called a broad range replicator.
broad range replicator is like to replicate anything, like food or anything.
Yes, just like you see on Star Wars, just like you see in the movies, where they, you know, you want a meal, you say, you know, make me a pot roast dinner or whatever. And
well,
it
again,
replicates
I'm a 20th century you know, witness, but the 21st century witnesses that I've talked to have seen the replicators that, you know, if you want a cheeseburger with a chocolate shake, you know, it'll make exactly the same cheeseburger and chocolate shake every single time, because and it's similar like the med beds, because as Tesla said, you know, everything is oscillation. It's the plasmatic field of the universe is basically oscillating, and the oscillating is controlled by consciousness, of course. But all matter is nothing more than the geometry of these oscillations that form matter. And so if they can do that with a med bed, they can do that with a food replicator or broad range replicator, meaning you can make anything you want. You know, you just have to program it in. I guess like taking it's funny, my wife has never saw the movie Forbidden Planet, you know, back in 1956. And it's kind of interesting. Robbie the robot comes out and he's and one of the, they act like a bunch of sailors, you know, one of the on board the spacecraft says, oh, he wants this whiskey replicated, you know, so he has this he takes a sample of it, and then he makes all these bottles of whiskey for him. He's like has a built-in little replicator inside of him, you know. In this 1956, that movie was so far ahead of its time, you know, talking about going through a leap, like a wormhole through space and entering, and is incredible, you know, for its time.
Yeah, I mean, where do they come up with those ideas? I believe that there have been those types of things where they've been able to, you know, gather the information from that and put it in the movies, or put it in, you know, the whole what were the things that they scanned your body with in Star Trek? What were they called? Oh gosh, I can't think of the name. Anyway.
Oh, the teleporters, or?
No, Bones had one.
Oh yeah.
It was the thing they scanned your body and they could tell what, you know, anything that was wrong with you, or a broken bone or whatever, and they could fix it right away. So you just wonder, wow, who came up with that? Was that just a creative person, or did they really have some insight to that?
Well, Forbidden Planet came out in 1956, and if they had anti-gravity by October in 1954, in 1954, Walt Disney was with Wernher von Braun selling the public on using rockets to go into space, when him and his mentor, Professor Hermann Oberth, they knew they had acquired the knowledge of torsion physics in order to overcome Earth's gravity, you know, way back in the 30s. And so they were keeping us in this, you know, with Walt Disney, keeping us in this belief that that's the only game in town is use rocket propulsion to overcome the gravity. When they knew full well that they that they already had a base established on the moon and had been using anti-gravity for some time.
Tony, you still there? Oh, there you are.
Any other, I don't know if I have the answers, but I love interacting with all of you, and if you have any other questions.
Tony's having some technical difficulties. Oh, I guess she's gone. Tony, you still there? Okay, I guess we'll move on to the next question. Jennifer, you had a question, and then we'll get to Jesse. Jennifer, are you still on?
I see her. She's there. Huh. Maybe we can pick Jesse and then come back to Jennifer.
Yeah, let's do it. Go ahead, Jesse.
Oh, I forgot my microphone again. Hi, everybody. Hi, Dan. Nice to see you again. I kind of have a different question, I guess. I think it might be kind of funny, I guess. I don't know. But have you thought about, I'm not going to say if, I'll say when you get the opportunity to go off planet. Have you thought about where you would like to go other than our immediate vicinity, like Earth or the moon, a planet in our solar system or another galaxy or what have you?
I live with my wife on this remote mountaintop in the Siskiyou Mountains of Oregon. I love this planet. You know, it's a beautiful planet. I would love to do a tour, you know, I'd love to see some of the ancient cities, you know, in Mars, and I'd love to see the bases that Carl Wolf saw, that one of the witnesses that who at the end of his testimony says, here it is 30 years ago today, and I hope to hear it on the evening news, but the evening news completely cut it out. The poor guy was killed on his bicycle by a big truck, but he said there was domes. I live in a giant cement geodesic dome on top of this hill. Domes, mushroom-shaped buildings, towers, and there's, you know, operations all over the solar system, you know.
Yeah, like go somewhere for like a tour. I mean, you could obviously come. I love Earth too. I'd want to come back, but have you thought about anything that interests you that you would like you said, like take a tour of another planet, as long as the friendlies are there?
Yeah, as long as it's not like what some of the witnesses are talking about. Some of the animal creatures and stuff like that are pretty scary. Yeah, I would love to do that. You know, when I was it's funny, when I was share a story when I was really young. I was like 5 years old or something, and my mother was saying, you know, oh, in the future we're planning on going to the moon. And I remember feeling this incredible wave of disappointment. And I said, what, we haven't been to all the planets, you know? So I always remember that feeling that we haven't gone to all the planets. That's hard to believe. But yeah, that's the world we all have been born into, is one that's been hijacked, and that keeps us believing, you know, we need rockets to, and we still haven't, just planning on going back to the moon again. People are looking up there, what's going on.
Been there, done that, right? Now.
Yeah, it's just like William Tompkins says, first of all, it's not a moon, and second of all, it's not our moon.
I've heard that. Yeah. It's like a satellite or something. Anyway, I just,
he saw on the live video feed when he was working at TRW, the huge, massive, I mean, it looks like, made the lunar module look like a speck. These giant spacecraft lined up along the crater that basically warned them off the moon. They said they could do a few more. They knew they were committed, but basically they shut down any further operations. So I don't know what's going to happen when they start discovering all the stuff that's on the moon over there in the probably very near future.
oh yeah, speaking of that, you just reminded me of something. I had, I wish I could, I listened to so many podcasts, and Michael, Dr. Sala is one of them. Maybe it was from that one, talking about how they had turned off, there was some sort of, I can't remember what it's called. And just because I can't think of what it's called, I'll call it some sort of microwave or satellite. I don't know, but it was beaming at the Earth or something to, like, for mind programming or what have you. Had you heard anything about that? That it had been turned off recently. And so when I heard that, I was like, ooh, but then it's like people still seem to be the same. But then I read something else where they were saying they had to do it gradually, otherwise people would snap out of their like coma or whatever you want to call it too quickly, and they become disoriented or upset when they saw, you know, when they woke up too quick or something like that. Or
I've heard that. There's no way to verify it.
Yeah.
That I know of. It seems like there's definitely a quickening going on where the frequency is increasing.
Yeah.
People are, well, look at all of us, we're talking about all this stuff. And
Not the only weird one.
20 years ago, this wouldn't have been happening. It was, wouldn't it be incredible that the entire, and it seems as though there's many indications that this can happen, that the entire deep state is taken down. All these people who are these criminals that have been hijacking humanity are taken care of with the laws of justice, and that these technologies are released, and the med beds and all the medical centers, and that, it's not, my great grandfather was the president of the Homeopathic Medical Society that was fighting Rockefeller medicine, who was, with the pharmaceuticals. Wouldn't it be amazing that really the medical system today is so corrupt? People have a problem and their bank accounts wiped out if they go to the medical system. We need to have more humanitarian of a medical system than it is. My mother had cancer, and the doctor in the US said they want to remove her eye and half of her face. And so I found alternative treatment, which had much higher statistics, using natural nutritional therapy across the border, because it's illegal to have it in the United States, even though they're like way greater recoveries of people who are like level 4 cancer patients.
Mhm.
And it completely cured her. She lived in her 90s, and when she got inspected back again, I spent time down there with her doing the same diet that she was doing, because I happen to like carrot juice and all the other things. And they couldn't find a trace of cancer in her body, and he's almost like he was disappointed. They make so much money off of the chemotherapy, the pharmaceuticals, the surgery, and the medical system shouldn't be so, I don't know, it's just, people should be compensated for their time, but it just seems like it's robbery, that goes on with the medical system.
Yeah, well, hopefully, and that's all being exposed, and it's coming to an end shortly. I'm so excited that
Oh
all this
yeah.
stuff's on the horizon.
med beds in all the hospitals, and hopefully for free. That would be great.
Yeah.
And I'm in my 70s, and I could definitely appreciate some reverse aging, and
I'm with you
um,
right there. Wouldn't we all? Okay, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
yeah, appreciate your question, Tessie. Anything else out of the minds of all these wonderful people?
Yeah, does anybody else have any questions? I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but if we have any more raised hands, anybody?
The only thing we had were Jennifer's questions if she's back. And I think Brandon is pacing himself.
Is Jennifer back yet?
I haven't heard from her yet.
I don't see her anywhere. Not even, well, she's just.
Maybe she's getting dessert.
Could be.
Jody has a question. Go ahead, Jody.
Okay. Dr. Greer's work and the ET connection as far as our consciousness, because it is about consciousness and connecting. Your experience as to contact, individual contact. Obviously, each of us have the capability of telepathy. And that the question I have is, when you has anybody, or have you experienced where you've gone consciously and connected with some of our star sisters, brothers, or whatever? The protocol, I get a little spooked as to who I'm talking to when I've done that in the past. I had an experience dealing with talking to a negative being, and I didn't know it was negative. I thought it was benevolent, and I learned the importance of doing clearings, which is just making sure that I raised my vibration, the request for benevolence only, that kind of thing. I've learned since through a bad experience. But have you found something, any experience you could share with us as far as actual contact?
Oh, excellent question, Jody. Echoing here. Everybody hear my voice? Echoing?
Yes, it's got some feedback.
Oh, okay.
Myself.
Oh, okay. It's gone. Yeah, I've been to Creston, Colorado, Joshua Tree, Shasta, more than once, in the CSETI trainings with Dr. Greer, and I'm very familiar with the protocols where you vector out and you bring them in, and your intent, and also getting to that meditative space within you so that you have that connection. Way before I learned anything about CE5, in 1977, I was in the mountains, and there was if you go to marcelvogel.org, I kind of did some of the experiences I had, kind of tried to graphically portray them. But I felt from the sky up in the mountains at night, an intelligence coming from the sky, and it was very intense. And it was so intense, I raised my hand out and I said, is somebody out there? Like that. And star started going up and down like yes, and was scintillating different colors. It was a craft. And I called my girlfriend over, and it kind of unnerved her. And I really wanted them to come in closer. But I don't think when they sense any fear, they don't do that. As far as let's see, there's another important part of your question you were asking. what you said about, I thought it was very important what you said about clearing, like you set the dials. Everything's about intention. And setting the environment. Way back in the early 80s or 70s sometime, and I was with a group that was doing some channeling work, and I actually had a physical demonstration of what happens when you clear the energy. And we had a tape recorder going, and you've heard of spirit voice recordings. We started the session, and we were saying, you could hear it on the recording. We're saying, okay, we ask any entities, that come for healing, to be taken to their own perfect place of expression. It was kind of clearing the area. In other words, setting the intention for that there's not any negative influences and things. And when we played back the recording, I wish I had a copy of it. When we were saying, we asked that, higher masters, take any entities and take them to their own perfect place of expression. On the recording, through the whole thing, there was this sound of this going, all while we were talking. And then when we asked to be taken to the perfect expression, the sound went like that, in a real high pitch, and it like disappeared. Kind of gave a physical recording of a substantiation that what we were doing by clearing the space actually they had some physical effect, that was happening with this being, whatever it was that was on the recording. Just thought I'd share that. So I think the moral of the story is, I think it's good to set, when you do something, everything's like a ritual in life. So when you set your intention, set your intention and I always like to set for the most benevolent outcome of all concern. And when you do that, it has a much greater power and effect, I believe, and especially if you do it with love.
Yes, I agree. Is that all you have, Jody, for your questions?
Yes, thank you. Just wanted to hear another suggestion, and yeah, I think it's really important for keeping your space clear. And when we go to connect with our brothers and sisters, we definitely need to come in that bubble of love and clear the space when we're gone. It's kind of like hanging up the phone. But I didn't know if anybody else had any experiences with it, because that's where we're heading, So thanks. I appreciate it.
It's true.
Yes, it's very, very true. Does anybody else have any questions?
Maybe we let Brandon ask the last one for the night.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm privileged. Okay, I'll take that. My question will be about his website. I haven't had a chance to. I've bookmarked it, but I haven't had a chance to dig into it yet. I want to tie like a whole bunch of little questions towards your website. I actually work with some veterans with my little group, and a lot of times guys will tell me stuff like, this one guy was a guard at the Antarctic base, and he actually encountered an actual Pleiadian who actually was able to use an ability to paralyze him. He could still breathe and use his eyes, but he couldn't move. And there was trauma behind that. In addition to the firmament as well. Curious if you knew about the firmament, if that's actually there or not, how these craft are able to go. I was told that the reptilians actually erected it during this dark period, so they could kind of keep us in this state and our other galactic friends couldn't help us because of it, and that's why the Nazis developed the bell so they could port through the firmament. There's so many questions to ask in those details. Does your website support that kind of form, or is it just a suppository of information and interviews you've collected?
It's an accumulation of witness testimonies, the documents that match some of the testimonies, events that have happened that kind of jump out at me, and it's not complete by any means, but it's things that in researching through histories through several different sources that are outside of our normal education system, that kind of spoke to me and say, this is an important event. This is and like I said, originally it was a article that was much shorter that this media company out of Hollywood wanted me to write on. The control of the title of it was "Who Controls the Agreed Upon Reality Through the Mainstream Media and Why They Fear Disclosing the Truth About the Extraterrestrial Reality." That was the title of the article. But once you start digging into this, it's like addictive. You can't stop, you just keep, so ever since then, it's been a long time since I started that article, and I continually add on to it. If you go there, there's a good page called Nazi Eugenics and Big Pharma that has to do a lot with what's going on right now. I recommend everybody to check out what many scientists and doctors are coming out. The history of the control of the media is kind of summated in a link called Enemy of the People. And it's not a professional site, it's just my online notes that it helps me in putting this information together. It helps me categorize it all in my mind so that I can share and talk with you. So I can cite dates, cite people, and so forth, and situations. But it's by no means complete. But everybody, each of us has like our own perspective to contribute to the full knowledge of that's been hidden from us.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. No, that was my question, was just the scope and scale of the website, what you can do, what you can't do, that kind of thing.
Yeah, appreciate your input, Brandon.
Yes, is that all then, Brendan, I guess? We do have Skippin who has a question. Skippin, can you ask your question, please? Is that your real name? And they said they can't raise their hand. Is that your real name though, or is that your nickname?
Oh, it's my nickname, my first letter of my last name. So it's Skip.
Okay.
Sorry for the confusion there. Anyway, Dan, you and I communicated through some emails. I had asked earlier after your last talk on the show here, I enjoyed so much, but I was asking something about the med beds with regards to having a 5D requirement for actual the healing process that had to be integrated either with the Akashic records or the let's say the virgin DNA blueprint that the body has at birth, working with it. And you had mentioned back to me that you'd either met or you had talked to one or two people that were in the 20 and back program. And your knowledge of that was that neither one, to the best of your knowledge, were at a 5D level.
What was that last part again, Skip?
Neither one of the people in which you had talked to, they were at the actual 5D vibration.
About the 5G, you said?
I'm sorry if something not coming through clearly here. Their spiritual evolvement, they had not reached the 5D vibration or frequency.
Oh, 5D. Sorry,
Yeah.
my hearing.
So you said it really, you didn't see it based on that circumstantially, you didn't see it as being an actual requirement for the use of the med beds. Because my question was more focused on people that inadvertently, or let's say for whatever reason, they had taken the COVID shots, and to be able to retroactively take them back to the previous DNA blueprint, which they had previous to taking the contaminated shots. Do you remember this exchange?
Yes, yeah. I know a lady in New Zealand who actually was one to talk me into going public, getting on Coast to Coast and doing talk shows and stuff like that. Otherwise, I was like off the radar completely. She was actually taken to one of the deep under the ocean bases that were joint extraterrestrial military, and taken into one of the medical facilities where one of the extraterrestrials were showing her that cut the arm and were able to time reverse it back to the point before it was cut. And so that time reversal technology seemed, I don't have any personal experience, obviously, but I did work on this interesting camera with Dr. Vogel that could go backwards and forwards in the time. So there's some kind of elements, and this was like an antique of what they have in the secret space program.
That was like the old looking glass technology.
It was called the Delaware camera. If you go to marcelvogel.org, it has all the lab notes and everything about how the camera worked. But the med beds, it would only make sense since that they could reverse the damage of any kind of mRNA therapy that is done to people that could reverse it. It only would make sense that they would be able to do that. I'm no expert on it. Regarding,
sorry for interrupting you, but if I understand your logic here, I'm trying to stay with the same thread here. The logic would say that since it's actually reading the Akashic record level of the DNA, then at that point in time, it's uncontaminated, it's still sterile. It hasn't been modified in any way by something in the physical 3D world here.
right, that blueprint, that program,
Gotcha.
that each one of us has a very unique frequency DNA. That's a complex DNA. As far as being brought up to a higher vibration, a 5D, one of the experiences I had, which is at marcelvogel.org, where I was actually put through something like that, where I was, remember being on board a craft with all these little guys and one big guy that went up to the control panel, and I had this sensation of starting to spin round and round and round. And then it's like he had this control that started increasing it, and I started, the spinning sensation became so intense, I couldn't handle it. I said, in myself, I said, I turned this over to my higher self. And when I did that, I went through some type of portal that brought me into a heightened, higher state of awareness, whether it's labeled as 5D or whatever it was extremely euphoric. And I became very aware of my co-creative ability with reality, that as I was almost seeing the pulses in between creation. As you witness something, it's like this feedback loop that happens. And if you're at this higher frequency, you can almost see that you're involved in the creation of what you're experiencing. But at a lower frequency, it happens so fast that it appears to be solid and unchanging.
as it's manifesting, you're actually witnessing it like a viewer.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like, a 60 hertz AC signal has a fluorescent light that's going off and on 60 times a second, but the eye can only discern 30 times a second. And so it appears to be solid and on, just like a television set. It's, that's changed. It's the old days.
No,
But
I get your
the scanning of all these things, if you could heighten your ability to sense, you'd see this dot moving across the old style TV screens that are forming the picture that you're seeing. It's similar with consciousness, like Einstein said, is reality is an illusion, and a persistent one at that. The persistent nature of reality is interfaced with our consciousness, as Uri Geller, does. You and the spoon are one. You're bending yourself basically. And I've had some telekinetic experiments like that, where I had this psychotronic twirler inside of a glass jar. And when I worked with the Navy on the engineering center, there was this this black fellow who I worked with, and he would not believe that I could turn it. And when I was able to turn it with my mind, but when he was there, his belief that I couldn't turn it was stronger than my belief that I could turn it. And I couldn't turn it in front of him, but reality is being co-created every instant. And if we go to a higher state of consciousness, we can see our participation in it, if that makes sense.
A lot of clarification added to that conversation previously. Thanks, Dan.
My pleasure, Skip.
Does anybody else have any questions? Anybody else? We've actually been going for 2.5 hours, but I just wanted to ask Dan. So Dan, I do have to say that I have 2 friends who have witnessed reptilian shapeshifters in front of them, and they've seen the eyes turn into slits. So whatever we may be dealing with, I'm not real sure. I'm sure there's hybrids everywhere, but they do look like us, and that's kind of, the deeper
It's
thought.
funny how David Icke keeps getting validated. He's been at it for a long time with the reptilian shapeshifters and Saturn and everything. It's interesting.
Yes, and I think it was Gene Decode who recently was talking about the reptilians, if I'm not mistaken. I listened to Juan O'Savin and Gene Decode, and they're kind of similar because they never show their faces, but I think it was Gene Decode who was actually speaking about the 3-foot reptilians that have a proboscis on their head that they then inject into the eye of their victim. And this is why a lot of the famous people and world leaders and things had a black eye, was because this thing injected its consciousness into the bodies of its victims. And it sounds like sci-fi again, like, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. But again, what is this reality? I mean, I think we're all trying to figure that out.
The real truth of all of this keeps, like Dr. Greer used to say, it keeps its own best secrecy, because it's so far from our indoctrination on this planet that they know that people start talking about the reality of that's actually going on. It just sounds like too much of a bizarre science fiction movie.
It does, and that's how they can keep people disbelieving much of it, is because everybody will be like, oh well, that's just the movies, that's just fiction. And I'm of the belief system that I'm open to any and all information as it comes. My belief system is malleable, and I think it's one of the best ways to be.
Yeah, it's like, people trying to wrap their minds around, could a global cabal be tricking us through the media to, inject poison to, depopulate the entire planet? And no, it's too much of a conspiracy theory.
Exactly. Exactly. So if we don't have any other questions, we've been on here for quite a while now, and I just want to thank you, Dan, on behalf of all the members and from myself for being here tonight. It's been such a pleasure, to have you here to share the information with the members, because again, this is what Connecting Consciousness also is about discussing the things that are not mainstream. I mean, we all want to get to the med beds, we all want to get to the children and helping, with all of that. But in the meantime, if we can just continue to grow our awareness on all these different levels, this is what I am trying to achieve by having you on, and other people as well. So thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. Remember, their power is secrecy and deception, and ours is disclosure and truth, and it has a much greater power than that. And so it's important that we speak up, and we share our thoughts, and we speak the truth, and help transform this into the kind of world that all of us, I think, in our heart want to see.
Yes, exactly. And I believe we are living in tremendous times. I mean, we're going to see this entire thing flip in our favor, and I know that it's going to be great at the end of it all. So again, thank you so much. And with
Pleasure
that,
joining all of you. Thank you.
Yes. Very much so. All right. Good night, everyone. Good night, all members.